In no relation to the classic Orient Express of continental Europe, the American Orient Express was one of the last lingering strands of classic train travel across the United States, providing lavish accommodation, service, cuisine, and comfort that attempted to hark back to the golden age of the railways during the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. Despite the expense, the American Orient Express proved to be popular throughout its brief history, and would travel across most parts of the railroad network of the continental United States until 2008, at which point the sudden collapse of the economy would spell doom to what was once the most luxurious modern land cruise available in America. When the nationalized Amtrak company was formed in May 1971, the golden era of American railroads had long since come to an end, with luxurious appointments in long-distance train travel having been sacrificed on the altar of economy, as domestic airlines and car travel worked to destroy the once dominant position of the railways on the American transport market. With state-sponsored improvements to the road and airline industry, including the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, that created 41,000 miles of interstate highway across the continental United States, the railroads that once prided themselves on their lavish flagship express trains were now burdened by their continued expenditure in a barely existent market, and thus by the time Amtrak came into existence, what was left was an exceptionally stripped-down experience for passengers that was but a shadow of the glory days once enjoyed by these firms. Amtrak would maintain this economy train travel system throughout the following decades, with what few lavish features of the long-distance services inherited by the company in 1971 being stripped down further to just a very basic transport provision, rather than a system that was tailored to the enjoyment of the journey alongside the provision of an end-to-end service, with the once lavish dining options now trimmed down, while cabins, roomettes, and social areas were stripped of their more luxury assets and decor. It was in this capacity that during the 1980s and 90s, various attempts were made to revive first-class train travel with the goal of providing accommodations once found on famous trains like the 20th Century Limited, the Broadway Limited, the Super Chief, the Empire Builder, and the California Zephyr, with some of these proposals being marketed as tourist attractions, while others were put forward as what were essentially land cruises, and were in fact a vacation package in themselves. In every case, these trains failed to earn a sufficient return on investment, with many going out of business after just a few years, while even Amtrak itself, hoping to rekindle some of the glamour its inherited trains once stood for, briefly attempting to increase the luxury and prestige of their named long-distance trains to no avail, though despite the threadbare profit margins, the allure and romance of passenger rail travel continue to persist. However, the most successful attempt to reintroduce luxury train travel across the United States would start its journey in Switzerland, when Albi Glatt launched the Nostalgie Istanbul Orient Express, or NIOE, from 1972, following the discontinuation of the classic Orient Express service of Europe by the original Wagon-Lits company the previous year, the NIOE being a dinner and tourist train that operated through parts of Europe and Asia. Given the size of the United States, and with a slant towards a slower-moving tourist market rather than a scheduled competitive train operation, Glatt was convinced that such a service could be provided for America if properly marketed and managed, with 1986 seeing the management of the NIOE contact William Spann, manager of the Bay Point Yacht and Country Club in Panama City, Florida, regarding a possible collaboration deal as to providing a tourist train in the United States based on the business case of the European Orient Express. Spann was enthused by the concept, and very soon multiple investors were found to support the scheme, while in order to provide the necessary rolling stock, a series of 11 lightweight streamlined cars built during the 1950s, amid the final years of premier train travel in America, were purchased either from Amtrak or other private railroads, while power was provided initially by a pair of F7A cab units leased from CSX Transportation, before being replaced by GP40 freight locomotives, each of which wore full tourist livery. The resultant American European Express, or AEE, would be inaugurated on November 15, 1989, with its first scheduled service being a 6-night run between Chicago and Washington, D.C., though the company made an initial blunder by partially marketing the train to business travelers, who found the steep costs far too high when compared to air travel, while at the same time not being enthused by the concept of undertaking a 6-day journey by train that could be done in 2 to 3 hours aboard an airliner, with even the choice of route from Chicago to Washington being criticized, as it was not considered the most scenic of potential journeys in the USA. Therefore, only a year later, the AEE was discontinued in November 1990 after failing to make a profit, though the management behind the scheme refused to give up, and reorganized the concept from March 1, 1991, to deliver a more scenic route between New York and Chicago via West Virginia's New River Gorge over the former Chesapeake and Ohio Main Line, while the marketing would no longer appeal to business travelers but instead be solely aimed at tourists. However, while the second incarnation of the AEE was slightly more successful, this version of the train continued to struggle with passenger numbers, and after 7 months in October 1991, the service once again ceased due to low ridership. Therefore, if the AEE was to have any hope of finding a sustainable market, a full re-examination of the possible clientele of the service needed to be made, with George Pierce, a successful businessman from Texas, coming aboard to refurbish the concept into something more appealing, Pierce having experienced success with his own tourist train operation in the form of the Texas Dinner Train, which ran over the Southern Pacific between San Antonio and Hondo, Texas until 1991. Pierce's suggestion was that the AEE should be marketed as a tourist attraction in and of itself, rather than being a point-to-point train service, and that the operation should capitalize on exquisite service, accommodation, and breathtaking scenery, with a focus being placed more on the American West, as this presented some of the finest vistas that could be viewed from a train, including the magnificent Rocky Mountains and the vast California and Arizona deserts. The new train would thus be rebranded the American Orient Express, and would make 12 trial trips during 1994, starting in August with excursions under the name Branson Limited, that were operated in conjunction with Amtrak, these trains running 9 services in total between Branson, Missouri and Newport, Arkansas, while 3 more were hosted from San Antonio, Texas to New Orleans, Louisiana, though despite the name change, the cars were virtually the same as those originally rebuilt by Caston Railcar of St. Louis and Northern Railcar Company of Milwaukee for the American European Express, with interior decor being the work of Bay Point Interiors of Panama City, Florida. The American Orient Express would live up to the standard of its European namesake by boasting lounge service, bedrooms and suites, the provision of dome cars, lavish interior styling, and a 5-star dining service, while the coaching stock would be adorned in a handsome cream and blue livery with gold pinstriping. From 1994 until 1997, the American Orient Express was a joint venture of Pierce's Trans-Texas Rail Incorporated and Reisebüro Mittelthurgau, a Switzerland-based enterprise, then operating the Nostalgie Istanbul Orient Express, while in 1996, the American Orient Express hosted 5 transcontinental excursions when a new owner entered the mix, that being TCS Expeditions of Seattle, which, from 1997, took over all operations and expanded its schedule and offerings into what was dubbed a cruise train, though the coaching stock was still the property of Reisebüro Mittelthurgau until it was procured by Henry Hillman during the same year. Under Hillman's control, he expanded the cruise train concept, which functioned and acted like accommodations afforded on a cruise ship, with unparalleled comfort and exceptional scenery, while at the same time offering overnight stays off-train and even rail cruise ship packages. This increase in demand among a growing passenger base requiring the addition of more cars to the consist, including Great Northern, Northern Pacific and Union Pacific dome cars, and a former Amtrak buffet lounge among others. By the turn of the new millennium, trips aboard the American Orient Express lasted on average between 5 and 10 days, with Hillman declaring that the service ran with full occupancy, though in 2006, the operation would be taken over by Colorado Rail Car Manufacturing, while power for the service was usually hired locomotives from Amtrak, initially the older F40 PH engines of the 1970s and 80s, before being replaced towards the end of the 1990s by newer P42 DC Genesis locomotives. Under the ownership of Colorado Railcar, the American Orient Express was renamed to Grand Lux Rail Journeys, with Tom Rader moving into the position of CEO, while by this point, the average ticket price for a 10-day experience through the Western National Parks cost $5,470 per person, making it by far the most exclusive rail operation in the United States. However, while the market remained strong, the business case of the service was swept out from under it by the impact of the 2008 global economic recession, with the demand for luxury travel in all sectors plummeting and passenger reservations aboard the train drying up completely. The final trip of what was once the American Orient Express being conducted on August 28, 2008, when it returned to Tacoma, Washington, while parent company Colorado Railcar would also go out of business during the same year due to its primary income being based on investments in tourist railways and other such ventures. Following the end of the service in 2008, many of the former coaches were either sold off for scrap, placed into storage, or preserved, while as of 2024, although various proposals have been mooted as to a potential revival of the scheme, a continued weakness in the luxury travel market, combined with a lack of capacity on America's primary railroads due to the ever-increasing demands of freight, mean the business case for this possible operation would garner, at best, very narrow profit margins, and thus be unable to justify the amount of capital needed to bring the concept to fruition in a sustainable manner. Nevertheless, the American Orient Express and its various incarnations proved to be the final hurrah for the classic American railroad passenger experience, delivering to the discerning passenger the glamour and opulence of what was once the golden era of the railways, as per the 1940s and 50s, presenting luxuries and service that was far beyond what was being provided by the mainstream passenger rail operator, while at the same time introducing tourists to some of the most beautiful scenery and culture in the continental United States.